The military transport rolled into Fort Hawkins with a mechanical groan and a cloud of Texas dust. Heat pressed down like an anvil on the sprawling training grounds, where the dry winds carried whispers of past wars. As the vehicle's doors swung open, Lieutenant Mackenzie Mac Reynolds stepped out, her boots meeting the scorched earth with quiet certainty. She adjusted her duffel bag across one shoulder, eyes scanning the vast compound with the careful assessment of someone who had seen far more dangerous terrain. It was desolate, hard-edged, and unforgiving, just like its reputation. Every step she took across the gravel courtyard seemed to echo in the stillness. Up ahead, a formation of soldiers was finishing morning drills, their movements precise and synchronized. Their eyes turned one by one, drawn not by her stride, but by the simple, shocking fact of her presence. She was the only woman among them. In this elite combat training unit of 180 men, Mac walked past without flinching. She didn't need their welcome. She wasn't here for friendship. Orders were orders, and she had earned her slot in this special joint training through merit, not favors. Still, whispers ignited like brush fire as she passed. "Great, diversity points," one soldier muttered. "Bet she doesn't last a week," another said, loud enough to be heard. A few raised eyebrows in curiosity, impressed by her unflinching confidence. But most just stared, watching her like an anomaly they couldn't yet categorize. The silent question hung in the air. What was she doing here? Inside the command building, she stood at attention. As Colonel William Hargrove entered the room, the air seemed to stiffen. He was a towering, square-jawed relic of an older military era. Vietnam, judging by the campaign ribbons. Rigid in posture, cold in tone, and meticulous in every movement, he carried himself with the weight of decades of command. His face was weathered by sun and war, eyes sharp beneath heavy brows that had seen too much to be easily impressed. He barely glanced at her file before addressing her. "You're Lieutenant Reynolds?" he asked, voice flat as the Texas horizon. "Yes, sir." He scanned her face, looking for weakness. Finding none, his expression hardened. "Your orders come from up top. I trust you understand the environment here. This isn't basic training." "I understand, sir." "Good." He snapped the folder shut. "You'll be following with 2nd Platoon. You'll be evaluated in 3 weeks for long-term assignment eligibility. That is all. Dismissed." No handshake, no welcome, just an unspoken message in his eyes. "I didn't ask for you to be here." Mac had faced worse. She saluted sharply, turned and walked out, leaving behind the echo of silent judgment. Her barracks assignment was tucked far at the end of the row, separate, of course. Some accommodations still hadn't caught up with policy. The room was sparse, a steel frame bed, a small desk, a locker that had seen better days. The walls were bare except for a faded poster showing the chain of command. That first night, she unpacked in silence. Her belongings were few: uniforms, boots, a weathered copy of Sun Tzu's Art of War, and a single-frame photograph. The image showed a younger Mac standing beside a tall man in full-dress uniform, his colonel's eagles gleaming on his shoulders. Her father's face bore the same determined expression she now carried. The frame had seen better days, its corners dented from being carried through too many deployments. The tattoo beneath her shoulder blade seemed to burn slightly, as it always did when she thought of her father. But no one here would see it, not yet. Morning arrived without mercy at 0430 hours. The base came alive with the sounds of boots on gravel and bark commands. Mac joined the formation for the mandatory 5-mile run. She positioned herself in the middle of the pack, watching, assessing. By mile 3, half the men were struggling to maintain pace. By mile 4, she had moved steadily forward, her breathing controlled, her stride economical. When they finished, she had outrun more than half the unit without showing signs of strain. Sergeant Jackson Jack Miller, the head training instructor, noticed. He was a solid wall of a man with close-cropped hair and arms corded with muscle. His eyes narrowed as she completed the run. "Not showing off, are you, Lieutenant?" he asked, the question carrying an edge. "No, Sergeant, just keeping pace," she replied, her voice neutral. Miller studied her for a moment longer, then turned away with a grunt. But the seed had been planted. She wasn't what they expected. At the firing range, Mac took her position with practiced ease. The rifle felt like an extension of her body, familiar and balanced. When the targets appeared, she fired with surgical precision, hitting center mass with mechanical consistency. The other soldiers glanced at her scores, then at each other. This wasn't beginner's luck. During gear drills, she dismantled and rebuilt her weapon faster than anyone else in her group, including the instructors. Her fingers moved with the muscle memory of someone who had performed the task 1,000 times before, often under far worse conditions than a training exercise. Miller watched with barely concealed irritation. During one particularly rough field maneuver, he barked, "You ever going to stop showing off, Reynolds?" She looked at him squarely. "Not showing off, Sergeant. Just doing my job." Chuckles erupted around them. Miller's jaw tightened, but he said nothing more. His resentment would only grow in the days that followed. By the end of the week, Mac had earned begrudging respect from some of the rank and file. Others remained skeptical, but the tension didn't go unnoticed. Colonel Hargrove observed everything. He rarely spoke during drills, instead watching from the edge of the field with arms crossed, his face unreadable behind aviator sunglasses that reflected the harsh Texas sun. The Friday afternoon brought a sudden change in the routine. The announcement came over the loudspeakers, cutting through the dry air. All personnel, full uniform inspection, 1,600 hours, parade ground, mandatory attendance. The timing was odd. Inspections weren't usually unannounced and rarely held outside in the brutal heat of late afternoon. Soldiers grumbled as they lined up in formation, tugging at collars already damp with sweat. Mac stood at the front, directly in view of Hargrove and the command staff. This wasn't about discipline, she suspected. This was theater. When she arrived, the murmurs began again. The other soldiers shifted uncomfortably. Some of them smirked. They knew something was off. So did she. The entire setup reeked of control, of spectacle. Hargrove walked the line slowly, eyes sharp, stopping only briefly at each soldier. His inspection notes were minor. A scuffed boot here, a crooked name tape there. Then he reached Mac. He paused longer than necessary, his gaze lingering like a challenge. "Lieutenant Reynolds," he said, his voice calm but carrying sharp undertones. "Step forward." She did, maintaining perfect posture. "You've had an eventful first week." "Yes, sir." "Let's see if you understand regulation." His eyes hardened. "Remove your blouse." There was a long pause, a few heads turned sharply. Mac blinked, momentarily stunned. "Sir?" she asked, her voice level. He didn't blink. "You heard me. Field regulation calls for proper layered uniform presentation. Take off your blouse so we can verify." The yard was silent now. Even the birds had gone quiet. Sweat trickled down her back, not from nerves, but from rage. She knew exactly what this was. Not regulation, not training, just humiliation. But she wouldn't give him the satisfaction. Slowly, Mac reached for the top button of her uniform blouse. Her fingers were steady. She undid one, then two, then three. Whispers rippled through the ranks. Button by button, Mac unfastened her blouse as 180 soldiers stood frozen in silence. No one laughed. No one even moved. The tension on the parade ground was thick enough to slice with a bayonet. When the blouse opened, she pulled it from her shoulders, folded it neatly over her arm, and stood at attention in her olive green undershirt, her rank still clearly visible on the collar tabs. Her posture was perfect. Her chin lifted. She gave them nothing, no shame, no fear. Behind his aviators, Colonel Hargrove's expression was unreadable. He stared at her shoulder. Then he opened his mouth to continue the inspection, but his words never came. A dark tattoo peeked out from beneath her short sleeve. At first glance, it was just black ink against tan skin, but the details began to emerge. A sharply inked eagle, wings outstretched in a battle dive. 3 arrows clutched in its talons. A coded series of numbers encircling the stark design like a seal. The moment Hargrove caught sight of it, he stiffened. His mouth closed, and a hushed murmur rolled across the formation. "Wait, is that?" someone whispered. Another voice, low and cautious, replied, "That's the mark of Nighthawk." Hargrove took one step closer, his boots crunching in the gravel. His face, now visible without the glasses, had turned pale. His eyes locked on the tattoo, not with curiosity, but with something dangerously close to fear. He knew what it meant. So did a handful of the older NCOs in the back ranks. Nighthawk wasn't a legend. It was a classified ghost unit. Special operations operatives trained in deep recon, urban warfare, survival under zero support, and silent extraction. The missions never made the news. Many weren't even debriefed. Those who made it through Nighthawk training rarely spoke of it. Most didn't survive long enough at Baram. The tattoo wasn't a decoration. It was a signature, a mark given only to those who completed its final mission. Not training, but a live operation. Where mistakes weren't corrected, they were buried. Hargrove knew because years ago, during his desk job at Pentagon West, he'd signed a denial letter to transfer someone into Nighthawk, a male captain. That was the last time he heard of the unit. But now, standing before him, a female lieutenant bore the tattoo silently. And that changed everything. He turned toward the rest of the unit, suddenly aware of every watching eye. The silence had deepened. No one cracked a joke. No one dared. The same soldiers who'd rolled their eyes at her arrival now stood stiffly uncertain. Hargrove cleared his throat. "Inspection dismissed," he said, voice lower than usual. No one moved. Then he added louder, "You're all dismissed. Return to your assignments." The soldiers broke formation, whispering, side-glancing, many throwing looks back at Mac as she silently refastened her blouse and slung it over her shoulder. Hargrove turned to leave but paused. "Reynolds, with me." He didn't wait for a reply. He walked toward the command building with a faster pace than usual. Mac followed without speaking. Inside the office, Hargrove shut the door behind her. The room was dim, a fan buzzing overhead, stirring papers on the meticulously organized desk. He removed his glasses, sat behind the desk, and laced his fingers together. "You weren't supposed to be here," he said finally. "I was assigned here," Mac replied. He nodded slowly. "By who?" "You know I can't say." "And that tattoo?" Her lips barely moved. "Earned it." He exhaled through his nose. "I've read about Nighthawk. Enough to know what kind of hell you had to go through." He paused. "You could have just said something." Mac's eyes didn't waver. "You didn't ask." Hargrove stared at her a moment longer, then leaned back in his chair. "Do you know what kind of storm you've stirred up here?" "I didn't stir it," she replied calmly. "You did." His face hardened. But even in his glare, there was something else, a flicker of respect he didn't want to admit. "You're dismissed," he muttered. She nodded once, then left. Outside, the atmosphere had changed. Miller no longer smirked when she walked by. A few younger soldiers gave subtle nods of respect. Others avoided her completely, unsure what to think. In the barracks, someone had cleaned up the chalk insult that had been scrawled on her door earlier that week. She said nothing about the tattoo. She didn't need to. Its presence had done more in a few seconds than months of training could have. Still, she kept her focus, ran harder, drilled longer, spoke less, but the whispers continued. Late one night, two soldiers sat near the fire pit, voices low as they watched her walk past. "I thought Nighthawk was disbanded." "It was, but she has the mark." "You think it's real?" She didn't deny it, did she? And when Mac disappeared into the shadows near the obstacle course, the only thing they were sure of was this. They were no longer watching someone trying to prove herself. They were watching someone who already had, and had chosen to keep quiet about it. That silence was louder than any speech. 2 days passed, but the silence didn't fade. Mac walked through camp with measured steps, her uniform crisp, her expression unreadable. The soldiers around her had shifted. They still watched her, but not with mockery. Now it was caution, some with awe, a few with quiet resentment. Sergeant Miller had gone noticeably quiet. He no longer barked at her during drills. Instead, he watched, hawk-eyed, waiting for something to slip. Colonel Hargrove hadn't spoken to her since the inspection, but something in him had changed. She could feel it, like a man who'd seen a ghost and wasn't sure whether to salute or run. But the friction in the unit hadn't gone. It had only mutated. One afternoon after a field exercise, Mac entered the mess hall. A group of soldiers fell quiet as she passed. One whispered, just loud enough to hear, "She probably got that tattoo at a damn biker shop." The others chuckled. She ignored it, filled her tray, and sat alone facing the window. That evening, Hargrove called another assembly. No warning, no explanation, just full unit turnout, parade ground, Class A uniforms, 1,800 hours. This wasn't training protocol. Something else was coming. When the troops lined up in the burning twilight, the air felt heavy, like a storm on the edge of breaking. Mac arrived in her formal uniform, spotless, every button gleaming. Her cap was square, boots polished to a mirror shine. She stood dead center, row 2. Hargrove approached the front, clipboard in hand. "This unit," he began, "has long stood on discipline, on order, on example, but there are standards to uphold. Uniform integrity is not optional." His voice was louder now. His speech had rhythm. "Some soldiers arrive with unusual backgrounds. They may think themselves exempt from review, but we do not play favorites. We correct everyone publicly if needed. He turned, pointed at Mac. Step forward, Lieutenant Reynolds. She stepped forward without hesitation. This is the same soldier who removed her combat blouse earlier this week. He paced slowly in front of her. While some of you might be enchanted by stories or inked fairy tales, I care about regulation. Mac's jaw clenched, but her posture remained perfect. Again, he said, remove your blouse, regulation check. The air cracked with tension. This time it wasn't just about humiliation. He was pushing her, daring her, hoping she'd break protocol or disobey. He wanted her to crack in front of everyone, but she didn't. Without a word, Mac unbuttoned the top of her Class A blouse. She removed it, revealing the regulation-issued an undershirt beneath. Her tattoo sat squarely on her right shoulder, impossible to miss in the fading light. A ripple ran through the crowd. Even those who had mocked her fell silent. Hargrove stepped forward slowly. He stared at the tattoo, again, as if trying to convince himself it wasn't real. She wears a mark not listed in her file, he said, a mark associated with a program that officially does not exist. Then something unexpected happened. From the back of the crowd, a voice cut through the stillness. It exists. Every head turned. It was Master Sergeant Frank Thompson, the grizzled veteran who rarely spoke during assemblies. At 68, he was the oldest active duty soldier on base, a living relic kept on as a trainer and advisor. His leathery face was a map of decades of service, from Vietnam to more recent conflicts. Hargrove blinked. Excuse me? Thompson walked forward, his own sleeves rolled just enough to reveal the top edge of the same eagle tattoo, though faded and scarred. I saw that ink last in '93 in Mogadishu, he said, his voice carrying the weight of hard truth. We lost 7 men before that evac. One of them carried that bird on his shoulder. They got us out anyway. He looked directly at Mac. She didn't steal that ink. The crowd murmured. Hargrove's composure slipped. I didn't authorize this, he muttered. No one authorizes Nighthawk, Thompson said. That's the point. Hargrove took a step back. Dismissed, he snapped. But it was too late. The damage was done. Mac refastened her blouse slowly, eyes forward. As she walked back to formation, the soldiers beside her didn't move. They didn't speak, but something had shifted permanently. Hargrove turned and marched off the field without another word. Back in her bunk that night, Mac stared at the ceiling, arms crossed under her head. She didn't feel victorious. She felt tired. Exposing the tattoo was never her plan. But now it was out, and that meant things were only going to get harder because now everyone knew she wasn't ordinary. And not everyone likes a reminder that the world is full of people who've done the impossible and survived. By the next morning, the entire base buzzed with whispers. Word of Mac's tattoo had traveled faster than any official bulletin ever could. Not just that she had it, but that Thompson had confirmed it. The unit no longer debated if it was real. They debated what it meant. Mac woke early. She always did. She didn't need the alarm. She dressed without hurry, clipped her boots, tied her hair, and stepped outside into the rising heat. But now, every corridor she walked felt like a spotlight. Where there was once doubt or scorn, now there was tension. Quiet nods replaced mocking glances. Some soldiers stepped aside when she passed. Others stared too long, unsure whether to salute or avoid eye contact entirely. Even Miller seemed rattled. He passed her near the armory, offered a stiff nod, but said nothing. His usual cockiness had faded, replaced with caution. Mac said nothing. She didn't need to. Her silence had become her shield. Later that day, she was summoned back to Hargrove's office. She entered without knocking. He was already seated, the blinds drawn, the overhead light flickering slightly. His desk, as always, was spotless. A single file folder sat between them. Close the door, he said without looking up. She did. Hargrove exhaled. I've been on the phone all night. She didn't respond. He continued. I reached out to a few old names just to verify. You're not in any active registry under Nighthawk. There's no documentation, no transfer logs, no mission debriefs. That's how it works, Mac said simply. Hargrove finally met her gaze. And you're telling me you ran ops so black, even top brass doesn't see your trail? I'm not telling you anything, sir, she said calmly, because I'm not supposed to. You know that. A beat passed, then another. Hargrove sat back. I didn't intend to humiliate you, he said, almost believable. I intended to test your discipline. Mac didn't blink. You tested something else. He smiled faintly, but it didn't reach his eyes. You think I'm afraid of you? No, she said, pausing, but you're afraid of what I represent. Hargrove stood and walked to the window, pulling the blinds open. Below, troops marched in rows, kicking up dust. I built this unit with grit, he said. No shortcuts, no politics, no handouts. You show up with invisible stripes and think that makes you better. I never said I was better, Mac replied. You did, when you tried to make an example of me and failed. The silence that followed said more than either of them could. Then Hargrove turned, his voice colder. You're not a ghost anymore, Reynolds. You're here in my command. That tattoo might silence a few whispers, but it doesn't put you above orders. I've never tried to be above anything, sir, she said. I've only tried to earn what I wear. Hargrove nodded slowly, fingers drumming on the file. You'll stay in the unit, but I'll be watching. And so will they. She already knew. Outside, word had reached beyond the base. A military journalist, Marcus Wells, had shown up the next morning pretending he was doing a broad feature on elite training units. But he wasn't subtle. He lingered near Mac's unit. He asked questions that didn't fit the narrative. He watched her too closely. She ignored him, but not for long. That night, he cornered her outside the motor pool. Lieutenant Reynolds, he said, do you have a moment? She didn't answer. I've heard some remarkable stories. Some even say you were part of... I was never part of anything, she cut him off sharply. Nothing worth printing. Wells smiled. That's what makes it worth printing. She turned away. Good night, Mr. Wells. He didn't follow. She walked away, heart steady but mind racing. If the story leaked, she would be exposed. She wasn't afraid for herself. She was afraid of what it could do to the program that built her. The people still in it, the ones still silent, still in shadows. Later that week, during a combat simulation, Hargrove stood on the viewing platform, arms crossed as usual. Miller was leading his fire team. Mac assigned as second in command. Midway through, things went wrong. The assault routes collapsed under enemy fire. Miller hesitated. Mac didn't. She reordered the team through a blind ridge, flanked the enemy team with flawless timing, and secured the hostages in under 7 minutes. The observers erupted in applause. Hargrove didn't clap, but he didn't look away either. When Mac emerged from the training field covered in sweat and dirt, a few soldiers slapped her back. Others just stared. No one doubted her anymore. They didn't fully understand her, but they believed in her power. That was enough. That night, someone pinned a small note to her locker. It wasn't signed. We believe you earned it, but now prove to us why they feared it. She didn't smile, but her fingers brushed the edge of her tattoo. It wasn't about fear. It was about earning silence and surviving what most couldn't speak of. By the end of the second week, the base had stopped pretending. Mac was no longer just another name on the roster. She had become a quiet legend, the story spreading like wildfire through barracks and break rooms, across the motor pool and the range. But no one truly knew the full story. Until now. That evening, Hargrove summoned her again, this time without the usual clipped tone. The aide who delivered the message simply said, Colonel wants a private word, just you. Inside his office, Hargrove looked tired, not defeated, but older somehow. Sit, he said without formalities. Mac remained standing. He sighed. Look, I've been going over your personnel file for days, or what's left of it. It's like Swiss cheese. Redactions on top of redactions. Entire years just blank. That's not normal. She said nothing. I even called in a favor with Intel Group 7, asked about Nighthawk. They hung up after 5 seconds. That sounds about right, Mac replied. Hargrove leaned forward. What happened to you out there? She looked him in the eyes. You don't want to know. You're damn right I don't, he said, jaw tight. But I need to. You're now the focal point of this unit, whether I like it or not. Mac opened the side pouch of her uniform and placed a small sealed envelope on his desk. Hargrove hesitated. What is this? Authorization code, one-use access, temporary clearance for 10 minutes from General Montgomery. Hargrove's brows raised. The Montgomery? 4-star Joint Special Ops? She nodded. He opened the envelope slowly, reading the code written in careful black ink. Then he stood, walked to the secure computer terminal in the corner, and typed it in. What followed was 10 minutes of utter silence. Hargrove read the files, his face pale and increasingly drawn. One mission Syria, another Venezuela, a name removed from every press record, covert extractions, kill zone ratios, footage of enemy forces being wiped with surgical precision in the dead of night. No backup, no air support. And there, buried in the final page, a report signed off with only a code name, Stormbird. He looked back at her. That's you. Mac nodded once. Hargrove stood up, rubbing the back of his neck. Why the hell are you even here? You should be commanding Black Ops, not babysitting trainees. I asked to come here, she said. Hargrove blinked. Why? Because this is where the next leaders are made, and I want to see if any of them are worth it. Silence. I didn't come here to show off. I came here to test them. And myself. Hargrove walked back to his desk and sat, now looking at her not as an outsider, but as something closer to an equal. You could have let the rumor fade. Instead, you stood your ground and let them see it. They needed to, she replied. Not for me, for them. He studied her a moment. What happens now? I keep doing my job. From that day, Hargrove's attitude shifted, not with dramatic speeches or sudden warmth, but in subtle ways. He called her by rank, invited her input during strategy sessions, assigned her to co-lead high-level drills. The soldiers noticed, and so did Miller. One afternoon after PT, Miller approached her at the hydration station. I didn't believe it at first, he admitted, but I saw the footage. I asked around. Mac wiped sweat from her brow and said nothing. He swallowed. You led a unit of 6 into that compound. 60 enemies, 0 support. Everyone walked out alive. Not everyone, she said. One didn't make it. A pause. Why'd you come here, Reynolds? Really? She met his eyes. Because too many people forget that this uniform doesn't make you a warrior. You do. And some of these guys think barking loud makes them dangerous. Miller lowered his gaze. Yeah, some of them do. She walked away, leaving him to think about that. That weekend, Mac ran a voluntary night simulation. 35 soldiers signed up. She designed it to mimic real-world conditions, 0 light, unpredictable obstacles, psychological stressors. Most of them failed, but a few didn't. They pushed through, adapted, listened. When the drill ended, Mac called those 5 to the side. You want to be leaders? She asked. They nodded. Then stop asking permission to be excellent. Lead when no one's watching. It stuck. Within days, the base felt different. Drills ran smoother. Soldiers leaned on each other more. Even Hargrove started leaving early, something he hadn't done in years. But not everyone was happy. Marcus Wells, the journalist, kept pressing. He sent in a formal interview request, then an informal one, then a request through public affairs. She rejected them all. The last request came with a note. If you won't tell your story, someone else will. That night, she found her old Nighthawk coin in her bag, polished, heavy, and stamped with the words, "We fight so others may speak freely." She held it in her palm for a long time. Then, with quiet resolve, she made a decision. The story wouldn't be told by strangers. If it had to come out, it would come from her. The next morning, Max stood in front of the unit's mission planning room, watching the young recruits struggle through a complex coordination drill. Their movements were off, their timing sloppy. She didn't bark orders, she let them fail. Then quietly, she stepped in. No one's in charge, she said, her voice calm but firm. That's the problem. Miller nearby frowned. We've got a squad leader. She looked directly at him. Leadership isn't a title, it's action. Orders mean nothing if you don't inspire trust. The recruits watched her closely. She reworked the maneuver in 10 minutes, assigning roles based on instinct, not rank. The second run was flawless. Hargrove watched from the doorway. He said nothing, but his jaw tightened. Not with frustration this time, but restraint. He was starting to see what she was doing. And maybe, just maybe, he didn't hate it. Later that day, Hargrove called her in. You're training them better than most of my senior staff, he said. I'm not training them. I'm making them believe in something again. He studied her. I have an offer. It's unofficial, off the books. She didn't react. A transfer, quiet, back to special operations. One of the Blackbird teams is looking for a field leader. You'd be back in the real game. Mac didn't hesitate. No. Hargrove blinked. Why? She folded her hands. Because I'm already in the real game. These soldiers, they'll be the future one day. Most of them just don't know what that takes yet. Hargrove leaned back, watching her in silence. She didn't flinch. After a few seconds, he nodded once, almost respectfully. Then let's make it official, he said. The next week, Mac was assigned to lead Charlie Company, a group once known as the unit's underperformers. Slackers. Reassigned misfits. They quickly learned she wasn't going to let them coast. She trained them harder than any other platoon. Wake-ups at RO 400, drills in full gear, scenarios that mirrored real-world failures. No yelling, no threats, just relentless expectations. At first, they pushed back, but she didn't back down. Then something shifted. One night during a storm, Charlie Company volunteered to stay out on the obstacle range to finish their course without being told. No one had ever done that before. By the third week, they had the fastest maneuvering time on base, cleanest armory inspection, tightest formation. They started calling themselves Shadow Company. They never said it out loud, but everyone knew where the name came from. Meanwhile, Marcus Wells published an article. It wasn't an expose, it was a question. Who is the quiet soldier reshaping Fort Hawkins? No name, no photo, just stories from unnamed sources. Details about impossible drills, whispered references to a tattoo, and a powerful hint that someone from Nighthawk had surfaced again. The article went viral on military forums. Soldiers from other bases started requesting transfers to Fort Hawkins. But Mac kept her head down. The article never mentioned her name. That was all that mattered. Still, Hargrove called her in again. "You had nothing to do with that?" he asked. "No, you're not going to deny the truth in it, though, are you?" "No, sir," he sighed. "I'm not sure if I'm protecting you or if you're protecting us." Max stood. "Does it matter?" He smirked. "Not anymore." Sergeant Miller finally approached her that weekend. Not with sarcasm, not with spite, with humility. "I was wrong about you," he said. "At first I thought you were here to make noise. Now I see you were here to clean up the static." She gave a small nod. "Takes time to see clearly." He asked her something no one else had. "Was it worth it? All the black ops, the secrecy, the pain?" Mac didn't answer right away. Then she said, "Only if it helps someone else avoid the worst of it." Miller looked at her with quiet respect. "You've already done that." By the end of the month, Charlie Company led every category on the base. Hargrove promoted 2 of Mac's trainees early. One of them had never passed a fitness test before she arrived. And then came the inspection. General Robert Montgomery, a 3-star and former mentor to Hargrove, arrived unannounced for a full inspection of Fort Hawkins. Troops scrambled, pressure skyrocketed. But Mac wasn't nervous. She gathered Charlie Company and ran drills as if it were any other day. When the general toured the range, he stopped to observe one of her sessions. He watched as she corrected a recruit, not with yelling, but with precision. Afterwards, he turned to Hargrove. "Where'd you get her?" he asked. Hargrove smirked. "She got herself here." The general nodded. "Smartest thing you never did." Hargrove didn't argue. The next morning, Mac found a note in her inbox, unsigned, official letterhead. "Initiate recommendation. Lieutenant Mackenzie Reynolds, officer candidacy, full support. Discretion advised." She stared at it for a long time. Then she folded it and put it away. It wasn't time yet. Too many soldiers still needed a storm to follow. By the time August rolled in, the base had transformed. Charlie Company wasn't just leading stats. They were setting new standards. What started as a broken unit was now the pride of Fort Hawkins. Their drills were tighter, morale higher, and most shockingly, other platoons were starting to copy them. Mac had become more than a leader. She was an example, one that couldn't be ignored. And Colonel Hargrove, the same man who had once tried to humiliate her into silence, was beginning to ask for her opinion. Not just in closed meetings, but publicly, in front of senior staff. During a tactical debrief, when 2 senior sergeants argued over maneuver protocols, Hargrove cut through their bickering with a simple command. "Let's hear it from Reynolds." Everyone in the room paused. Hargrove gestured toward her like she was one of his own staff officers. Max stood, pointed to the map, and laid out a solution in under 2 minutes. No hesitation, no second guessing. When she finished, Hargrove nodded. "That's the play." No one objected. After the room cleared, he stayed behind. "You realize," he said, "a few months ago I was trying to get you transferred off my base." She nodded. "And now I'd fight to keep you." That wasn't a compliment. It was a shift, tectonic and quiet. But the story was far from over. A storm was brewing on the horizon, and Fort Hawkins would soon face challenges that went far beyond routine training. The shadow of Nighthawk was long, and it reached into places few dared to look. As Mac Reynolds made her way across the base that evening, watching the sun sink behind the distant mountains, she knew one thing for certain. The hardest battles were still ahead. And this time they wouldn't just be fought with weapons and tactics. They would be fought with truth, with loyalty, and with the kind of courage that no training manual could teach. The real test was just beginning. That weekend, while the unit was off duty, a surprise guest arrived. General Robert Montgomery, not in uniform, not with security detail. Just a man in his late 60s wearing jeans and aviators, leaning against a civilian SUV. Max saw him before anyone else. They locked eyes across the dusty parade ground. She gave the faintest nod. He nodded back. Colonel Hargrove came rushing out of his office in full uniform, surprise etched on his weathered face. "Sir, I didn't receive a visit notice," he said, quickly composing himself. Montgomery smiled, the expression crinkling the corners of his eyes where decades of hard decisions had left their mark. "That's because I didn't send one." He turned to Mac. "Walk with me." They moved across the edge of the training field, out of earshot. Soldiers watched from a distance, murmuring. Hargrove didn't follow. "I saw the article," Montgomery said, his voice carrying the quiet authority of a man who had ordered operations that would never see daylight. "You handled it well." I said nothing, and that was everything. He glanced at her. "You made an impression here." "That wasn't the point." "No," Montgomery agreed. "The point was proving to yourself you could lead without the shadow of Nighthawk behind you." She said nothing. He stopped walking and looked at her directly. The Texas sun cast harsh shadows across his face, highlighting the scar that ran from his left temple to his jaw, a souvenir from an operation in Beirut that had never been acknowledged. "You succeeded." She looked away, toward Charlie Company's empty formation square, still marked with the precision footprints of yesterday's drill. "They're not ready yet. They'll never be if you stay too long." Montgomery's voice softened. "Great leaders don't create followers. They create other leaders." She sighed. "You want me to leave?" "I want you to grow." He handed her a small sealed packet. Inside, a new assignment offer. Temporary command at Fort Liberty to train a new elite unit modeled after her work at Fort Hawkins. A stepping stone to officer candidacy. Full authority. Blank slate. "I don't want to give you orders," Montgomery added. "I want you to choose." She closed the envelope but didn't answer. That night, Max sat by the edge of the obstacle course. It was dark. Wind stirred the dust. She stared at the stars, her tattoo hidden under her sleeve, but pulsing in her memory. Footsteps approached. Sergeant Miller sat beside her. "They're saying you're leaving." She didn't respond. He sighed. "We'll be all right, but it won't be the same." She finally looked at him. "That's the point. It's not supposed to be." He chuckled. "Guess we'll have to earn our own thunder." "You already have," she said softly. From the shadows, a few of her Charlie Company soldiers appeared, standing quietly in a loose half circle. They didn't say goodbye, just stood with her like they always had. She stood, nodded once to each of them, then walked back to the barracks. But as Mac prepared for what might come next, another development was unfolding beyond the borders of Fort Hawkins. The next morning, Master Sergeant Thompson approached her after breakfast, his weathered face grave. "Got a minute, Lieutenant?" She nodded, and they walked to a quiet corner of the base, an old ammunition depot converted to storage. Inside, among dusty crates and forgotten equipment, Thompson closed the door behind them. "Something's off," he said, voice low. "That reporter, Wells, he's not who he says he is." Mac's eyes narrowed. "What do you mean?" "I've been around long enough to know a spook when I see one. He's asking questions about things no civilian journalist would know to ask about." "Like what?" "Operation Shadow Step, Kandahar 2003, and a code name I haven't heard in 15 years. Blackwater Junction." Mac's expression didn't change, but something in her eyes shifted. "You're sure?" Thompson nodded. "As sure as this old ink on my arm. Someone's digging, and it ain't for a feature article." Later that day, Mac found Hargrove in his office, studying a map of the base. She closed the door without being asked. "We need to talk about Marcus Wells." Hargrove looked up. "The reporter? What about him?" "He's not a reporter." Hargrove leaned back. "You have proof?" "He's asking about classified operations. Things that never made the news." Hargrove's expression darkened. "Like what?" "Blackwater Junction." The colonel's face paled slightly. He stood, walked to the window, and closed the blinds. "How do you know that name?" "The better question is, how does he?" Mac countered. Hargrove rubbed his jaw. "I'll make some calls. In the meantime, keep your distance." But keeping distance wasn't enough. The next day, Wells was back, this time with a press credential from a major military publication. He cornered Mac outside the training range. "Lieutenant Reynolds, I was hoping we could continue our conversation." "I have nothing to say to you," she replied, keeping her tone neutral. He smiled, a practiced expression that didn't reach his eyes. "I think you do, particularly about your time with a certain unit that doesn't exist." She kept walking. "I know about Belgrade," he called after her. 2004, the embassy extraction." She stopped. No one knew about Belgrade. The mission had been scrubbed from every record. 7 operatives, 3 days, no support. It wasn't just classified, it was buried. Slowly, she turned back to him. Who are you really? His smile thinned. Someone who believes the American people deserve to know what's being done in their name. Even if it gets good people killed, especially if it prevents more from dying. She studied him for a long moment. You were never a journalist. I've been many things, Wells admitted, just like you. Before she could respond, Hargrove appeared, flanked by two MPs. Mr. Wells, your credentials have been revoked. These men will escort you off base. Wells didn't resist. As he passed Mac, he whispered, this isn't over, Stormbird. The use of her code name sent ice through her veins. No one should have known that. No one. That evening, Hargrove called an emergency meeting with Mac and Thompson. They gathered in the colonel's office, blinds drawn, the only light coming from a desk lamp that cast long shadows across the walls. Wells is ex-CIA, Hargrove said without preamble. Discharged in 2008, reason classified. Why is he after Nighthawk, Mac asked. Not just Nighthawk, you. Hargrove slid a folder across the desk. Inside was a photograph of a man Mac recognized. Broken nose, scar above his left eye. Her heart stopped. Alexander Kovac, she whispered. Thompson looked between them. Who's Kovac? Serbian intelligence, Hargrove explained. Specialized in counter-operations against Western Special Forces. He was at Belgrade, Mac added. We crossed paths. He didn't walk away happy. He's been looking for you ever since, Hargrove continued. And according to my source, he's connected to Wells. They're working together. Why would an ex-CIA operative work with Serbian intelligence? Thompson asked. Money, revenge, ideology. Take your pick, Hargrove replied. The point is, they're not after a story. They're after names, operations, methods. And I just painted a target on Fort Hawkins, Mac said quietly. Hargrove nodded. We need to prepare. The next morning, Mac gathered Charlie Company. She didn't tell them everything, but she told them enough. We're going to be running a new kind of drill. Real-world security protocols. Not for a grade, for keeps. Miller stood beside her, arms crossed. You heard the lieutenant. This isn't a game anymore. The soldiers exchanged glances, but didn't question. They'd learned to trust her. Mac divided them into security teams, established new access protocols, and set up a rotating watch. To most of the base, it looked like an extended training exercise. Only Hargrove, Thompson, Miller, and Mac knew the truth. Fort Hawkins was preparing for an infiltration. But the preparation revealed something unexpected. While reviewing the base's structural plans, Mac discovered an anomaly, a section of the old administration building that didn't match current layouts. A space that shouldn't exist. Colonel, she said, pointing to the blueprints spread across his desk. What's this area here? Hargrove frowned. Storage. Been sealed up for decades. According to these plans, it's twice as large as it should be. That night, Mac, Hargrove, and Thompson used the colonel's master key to access the sealed wing of the administration building. Dust lay thick on the floor, undisturbed for years. Their flashlights cut through darkness that felt solid, revealing abandoned offices frozen in time, typewriters on desks, calendars still showing June 1972. What was this place? Mac asked, her voice hushed. Before my time, Hargrove admitted, but based on the era, I guess it was connected to intelligence operations during Vietnam. They moved deeper into the abandoned section. At the end of a long corridor, they found a heavy metal door with a combination lock that looked newer than its surroundings. Someone's been here, Thompson observed, pointing to faint footprints in the dust. Hargrove tried his master key. Nothing. This wasn't in any inventory I received when I took command. Mac examined the lock closely. This is a Titanium 7, DOD issue, circa 2000. Someone's been maintaining this door. Can you open it? Hargrove asked. She smiled faintly. They don't put these on doors. They don't mind people opening. She pulled a small kit from her pocket. But yes, 5 minutes later, the lock clicked. The door swung open with a groan of protest, revealing a room filled with filing cabinets in a single desk. On the wall hung a faded emblem, an eagle with arrows in its talons, surrounded by 13 stars. My God, Thompson whispered, this is a Shadowhunters archive. Shadowhunters? Mac asked. Vietnam-era special operations, the original template for programs like Nighthawk. Hargrove moved to the filing cabinets, tried one drawer, locked. Whatever's in here, someone wanted it preserved but forgotten. They spent hours going through what files they could access. Names, operations, dates, a hidden history of America's shadow wars. And there, in a folder marked Continuity, they found something that stopped them cold. A list of program code names. Shadowhunters. Black Echo, Silent Step, Nighthawk. They're all connected, Mac realized. Different names, different eras, same purpose. Hargrove held up a photograph, a group of men standing before a hangar, faces blurred by time and poor image quality. But on the shoulder of one, just visible, was the eagle tattoo. This goes back further than any of us knew, he said quietly. Thompson nodded. And someone else knows about this room, someone who's been here recently. As they were preparing to leave, Mac's flashlight caught something. A small black box tucked beneath the desk. Inside was a modern satellite phone and a notebook filled with what appeared to be surveillance notes. The most recent entry was dated 3 days ago. Wells, Mac said. He's been using this as a blind. Not just Wells, Hargrove replied, flipping through the notebook. Look at these notes. Multiple observers, multiple shifts. They've been watching us for weeks. But why? Thompson asked. What's so important about Fort Hawkins? The answer came to Mac suddenly. It's not about the base, it's about legacy. She pointed to the files. These programs, they're all connected by more than purpose. They're connected by people, mentors, trainees, family. Hargrove's expression changed as understanding dawned. The next generation. Exactly, Mac confirmed. They're not after old secrets. They're after the new carriers of those secrets. They're after you, Thompson said, and anyone you've trained. The discovery changed everything. The next morning, Hargrove called in additional security, but kept the reason classified. To the base at large, it was just an elevated security drill. To Charlie Company, it was deadly serious. Mac increased their training intensity, now focusing on counter-surveillance, extraction techniques, and close-quarters combat. The soldiers responded with a focus and determination that surprised even her. They weren't just following orders anymore. They were defending something they believed in. Miller approached her after a particularly grueling session. You knew this might happen, didn't you, when you took command of Charlie Company? She didn't answer directly. I knew my presence would have consequences. You could have requested a transfer, protected yourself. She looked at him. And left them unprepared? That's not leadership, Sergeant. That's self-preservation. He nodded slowly. You're training us to replace you. I'm training you to survive me, she corrected. Meanwhile, Wells had not been idle. A new article appeared online. Shadow Warriors, America's Undisclosed Combat Forces. It didn't name names or reveal specific operations, but it hinted at enough to make intelligence officers nervous. More concerning, it mentioned Fort Hawkins as a training ground for the next generation of deniable operators. Hargrove was furious. He's painting a target on every soldier here. That's the point, Mac replied. Force our hand, make us react. Well, it's working, the colonel admitted. I've got brass breathing down my neck, demanding to know what the hell is going on. What did you tell them? As little as possible, he sighed, but we're running out of time and options. The situation escalated further when Thompson discovered a listening device in the officer's mess. Sweeps revealed more. In the barracks, the command center, even Hargrove's office, someone had thoroughly compromised base security. We need to flush them out, Mac said during a secure meeting held in the motor pool, surrounded by the noise of engines to mask their conversation. How? Hargrove asked. We don't know who we're looking for. Yes, we do, she replied. We're looking for someone who knows too much, so let's give them something they can't resist. The plan was simple but dangerous. They would create a false intelligence leak, word of a special briefing about Nighthawk operations, to be held in the secure conference room. The only people who would know it was a trap would be Mac, Hargrove, Thompson, and Miller. What about Charlie Company? Miller asked. They'll be our backup, Mac explained, but they can't know the details. The leak has to look real. The trap was set. Word spread through carefully planted conversations and misplaced documents. The briefing was scheduled for midnight, 48 hours later. As the appointed time approached, tension on the base ratcheted higher. Charlie Company was positioned strategically, disguised as routine night patrols. Mac, Hargrove, and Thompson took their places in the conference room, a folder of fake documents conspicuously placed on the table. You think this will work? Thompson asked. If I were hunting Nighthawk secrets, this would be too good to pass up, Mac replied. They waited. Minutes stretched into an hour. Nothing. Maybe they didn't bite, Hargrove suggested. Then the lights went out. Emergency generators kicked in seconds later, but in that brief darkness, they heard the distinct click of the door lock engaging. They're here, Mac whispered. What followed was chaos. The door burst open and 3 men in tactical gear swarmed in. But Mac was ready. She moved with practiced efficiency, disarming the first intruder with a precise strike to the wrist, sending his weapon clattering across the floor. Thompson tackled the second, his age belied by the ferocity of his response. Hargrove, no stranger to combat despite years behind a desk, engaged the third. The fight was brief but violent. When it ended, all three intruders were subdued. One was a familiar face, Marcus Wells. "You're making a mistake," he spat, as Miller secured his hands behind his back. "The only mistake was yours," Mac replied, thinking we wouldn't be ready. The other two men were unknowns, but their gear told a story. Professional mercenaries, likely ex-military. The kind who asked few questions when the pay was good. But the victory was short-lived. As they were processing the captives, an explosion rocked the far side of the base. Then another. "It's a diversion," Mac realized. "The real target is elsewhere." They rushed outside to see flames rising from the old administration building, the secret archive. Someone had used the chaos to cover their true objective. "Charlie Company, converge on the admin building," Mac ordered into her radio. They arrived to find the sealed wing engulfed in flames. Two of Mac's soldiers were down, unconscious but alive. Of the attacker, there was no sign. "The files," Thompson said grimly. "They're destroying the evidence." "Or stealing it," Mac countered, pointing to a broken window. Someone went in. Without hesitation, she moved toward the burning building. "Reynolds," Hargrove shouted, "that's an order." She looked back at him. "With respect, sir, this is what I do." Before he could respond, she disappeared into the smoke. Inside, the heat was oppressive, the smoke disorienting. Mac moved with purpose, following the path they'd taken days before. The secret room's door hung open, and inside a figure was frantically stuffing files into a bag. He turned when she entered, a man she didn't recognize, but whose eyes widened in recognition at the sight of her. "Stormbird," he said, voice accented, Eastern European. "At last." "Kovac sent you," she replied. It wasn't a question. The man smiled, revealing a gold tooth. "He sends his regards, and a promise he will find all of you, one by one." "Not today," Max said, advancing. The man drew a weapon, but in the confined space with smoke-limiting visibility, Mac had the advantage of training. She closed the distance before he could aim, redirecting the gun with one hand while striking with the other. They grappled briefly, but Mac was faster, more precise. When it ended, the man lay unconscious, and the files were secure. Getting out proved harder. The fire had spread, cutting off her entry route. The smoke was thicker now, reducing visibility to arm's length. Mac hoisted the unconscious man over her shoulder, gathered the files, and sought another way out. She found it in a forgotten maintenance corridor, barely wide enough to squeeze through with her burden. The air was slightly clearer here, offering precious oxygen as she pushed forward. Finally, she emerged from a service door at the rear of the building, collapsing onto the ground as Hargrove and Miller rushed to her aid. "You disobeyed a direct order," Hargrove said, but there was no anger in his voice. "Wouldn't be the first time," she managed between coughs. The aftermath was complicated. The captured intruders were turned over to military intelligence. The fire was contained, but much of the archived material was damaged or destroyed. What Mac had saved, including the list of connected programs and several key operational files, was secured in Hargrove's safe. Wells refused to talk, maintaining that he was a journalist protecting his sources. The others were more forthcoming under interrogation. They confirmed what Mac had suspected. Alexander Kovac was hunting Nighthawk operatives, using Wells' investigation as cover. "Why?" Hargrove asked during a debriefing the next day. "Belgrade," Mac replied. "We compromised one of his operations. Cost him prestige, position. In his world, that's a death sentence unless you can restore your honor. By eliminating those who humiliated him," Thompson added. "And by proving that American shadow operations are real," Mac continued, "exposing us would be his vindication." "So what now?" Miller asked. "He'll try again." "Not here," Hargrove said. "We've increased security, changed protocols. Fort Hawkins is locked down tight." "That won't stop him," Mac warned. "It'll just change his approach." She was right. 2 days later, word came through official channels. A former special operations soldier had been killed in his home in Colorado. The report cited a burglary gone wrong, but Mac knew better. The victim had the eagle tattoo. Nighthawk was being hunted. General Montgomery arrived the following day, this time in full uniform, flanked by a security detail. The meeting was held in Hargrove's office, sealed and swabbed for listening devices. "We've got a situation," Montgomery began without preamble. 3 operators dead in the past month, all former Nighthawk. "Kovac," Mac said. Montgomery nodded. Intelligence confirms he's stateside, operating through a network of former Eastern Bloc assets. Wells was one of his information sources, but not the only one. How did he get their names? Thompson asked. Those records are buried deeper than anything I've ever seen. That's what concerns us, Montgomery replied. The only complete roster of Nighthawk personnel was kept in a secure facility at Langley. No remote access, no digital footprint. An inside job, Hargrove concluded. It's worse than that, Montgomery said grimly. We think he has the full list. Names, code names, last known locations. Everyone who ever wore the eagle is at risk. The implications hung heavy in the air. Mac felt the weight of it pressed down on her shoulders. Every operator, every mission partner, everyone who had trusted the promise of anonymity, all now exposed. What about the trainees? She asked. Charlie Company? Not at immediate risk, Montgomery assured her. Kovac is focused on confirmed operators. But long-term, if he exposes the program fully, they'll be compromised by association, Mac finished. Exactly. So what's the play? Hargrove asked. Montgomery looked at Mac. We need to end this, permanently. She understood what he wasn't saying. You want me to hunt Kovac? You're the logical choice. You know him. You've encountered him. And frankly, Lieutenant, you're the best we've got. And my command here? Temporary reassignment. Official cover as a training liaison to Fort Liberty. Unofficial mission parameters to be determined. Mac was silent for a long moment. She thought of Charlie Company, of the progress they'd made, of the trust they'd built. She thought of Miller and Thompson and even Hargrove. Leaving now felt like abandonment. But staying meant putting them at greater risk. I need time to prepare my company, she said finally. Montgomery nodded. 48 hours, then we move. After the general left, Hargrove remained with Mac in his office. You knew this might happen when you came here. I knew the risk, she admitted. I didn't expect it to find me so quickly. What will you tell your soldiers? She considered this. As much of the truth as I can. They deserve that. The next morning, Mac gathered Charlie Company on the training field. The sun was just rising, painting the Texas sky in shades of gold and crimson. Her soldiers stood at attention, faces serious, postures perfect. A far cry from the undisciplined group she'd inherited weeks earlier. I've been reassigned, she told them without preamble. Effective in 48 hours. A ripple of surprise moved through the formation, but no one spoke. In my absence, Sergeant Miller will assume command of Charlie Company. He has my full confidence, as do all of you. She paused, looking at their faces, young, determined, full of potential. They were no longer the unit's cast-offs. They were its pride. When I came here, I didn't know what to expect. I didn't know if I'd find soldiers worth training. What I found instead were leaders waiting to be recognized. The company stood straighter at her words. You've exceeded every standard, broken every record, and proven every doubter wrong. Not because of me, but because of what was already inside you. She stepped closer to the formation. The work we've done here matters. It matters more than most of you will ever know. There are shadows in this world, threats that never make the headlines, battles fought with no witnesses. Someone has to stand in those shadows. Someone has to fight those battles. Understanding dawned on their faces. They had guessed some of it already. The midnight drills, the infiltration tactics, the emphasis on deniable operations. I can't tell you where I'm going or what I'll be doing, but I can tell you this. What you've learned here isn't just about being better soldiers. It's about being the shield that others never see, the sword that leaves no trace. Miller stepped forward, called the company to attention. They snapped to with parade ground precision. Lieutenant Reynolds, he said formally, Charlie Company is yours. They saluted as one, a perfect, synchronized movement that spoke volumes about how far they had come. Mac returned the salute, her face composed, but her eyes revealing a depth of emotion she rarely displayed. Carry on, Carry on, she said simply. The rest of the day was a blur of preparation. Mac briefed Miller on everything he would need to know to continue Charlie Company's training. She reviewed security protocols with Hargrove. She even spent an hour with Thompson, listening to his stories of shadow hunters and the operations that history had forgotten. You know, the old sergeant said, I never thought I'd see another eagle in my lifetime. Thought that program died with my generation. It evolved, Mac replied. The mission remained the same. Thompson nodded. The shadows never go away. They just change shape. He rolled up his sleeve, revealing his faded tattoo. We didn't have a fancy name back then. Shadow Hunters was just something we called ourselves. But the job was the same. Protect what matters, no matter the cost, Max said quietly. Exactly. Thompson studied her. You're going after him, aren't you, Kovac? Someone has to. Be careful. Men like that, they're not just dangerous because of what they can do. They're dangerous because of what they're willing to do. I know. The old sergeant placed a weathered hand on her shoulder. When this is over, when you've put this ghost to rest, come back. These kids need what you have to teach. She promised nothing, but the words stayed with her. That night, as she packed her few belongings, there was a knock at her door. It was Hargrove. Got a minute? He asked. She nodded, and he entered, closing the door behind him. I owe you an apology, he said without preamble. Sir? When you arrived, I saw a disruption, a political appointment. Someone sent to check boxes. He shook his head. I was wrong. You were cautious, she corrected. In your position, I might have done the same. No, he said firmly, you wouldn't have, because you see people for what they can become, not for what you fear they are. He held out a small box. Inside was a set of captain's bars. Your promotion came through. Montgomery expedited it. She took the box, feeling the weight of it in her palm. Thank you, sir. There's something else. Hargrove handed her a folded paper. I found this in the archives before the fire. She opened it. It was a personnel transfer request from 1991, a young soldier requesting assignment to a classified unit. The name at the bottom made her breath catch. Captain James Reynolds. My father, she whispered. Hargrove nodded. He was selected for Shadow Echo, the predecessor to Nighthawk. His request was approved 2 weeks before he was killed in Desert Storm. Max stared at the document, her father's signature sharp and clear despite the years. He never told me. He couldn't. That was the deal. Hargrove paused. But I think he would be proud to know you finished what he started. When he left, Max sat on her bunk, the transfer request in one hand, her captain's bars in the other. The past and future balanced in her palms like scales. Her father had died a hero's death, leading his men during a sandstorm that had concealed an enemy position. She had joined the military to honor his memory, to continue his legacy. But now she understood that legacy ran deeper than she had ever known. The eagle tattoo on her shoulder seemed to burn again, not with pain, but with purpose. Her path forward was clear now, illuminated by the shadows of the past. The next morning, Mac rose before dawn. She dressed in her uniform one last time, pinning the captain's bars to her collar. They felt strange, unfamiliar, but right. As she stepped outside, she found Charlie Company waiting, formed up in the pre-dawn darkness. Not just her soldiers, but Miller, Thompson, and Hargrove as well. What's this? She asked. Proper send-off, Miller replied. Hargrove stepped forward. Captain Reynolds, before you depart, Charlie Company has requested permission to demonstrate their readiness. She understood then. This wasn't just a farewell. It was a gift, a chance to see the fruits of her labor, to witness what they had become under her guidance. Permission granted, she said. For the next hour, as the sun rose over Fort Hawkins, Charlie Company executed a flawless demonstration of everything she had taught them. Combat maneuvers, infiltration techniques, adaptive tactics. They moved like a single organism, each soldier anticipating the other's movements with uncanny precision. When they finished, standing at attention beneath the Texas sky now painted in full morning light, there was no applause, no cheers, just the profound silence of shared understanding. Hargrove called them to attention one final time. Captain Reynolds, Charlie Company is yours. She approached the formation, walking slowly along the front rank. Each face met her gaze with steady determination. These weren't the same soldiers she had found weeks ago. They were transformed, hardened, focused, ready. Remember what you are, she told them. Remember what you can become. The uniform doesn't make the warrior. You do. She saluted, and as one, they returned it. Crisp, perfect, proud. Then she turned and walked away, her duffel over her shoulder, the weight of her new mission settling across her back like familiar armor. Fort Hawkins fell behind her, but she carried it with her, in her memories, in her purpose, in the knowledge that she had left something valuable behind. Not just soldiers, but leaders. Not just a unit, but a legacy. As her transport pulled away, dust billowing in its wake, Mac Reynolds looked to the horizon. Somewhere out there, Alexander Kovac was hunting her brothers and sisters in arms. Somewhere out there, the shadows were deepening. It was time to step back into the darkness. Time to become Stormbird once more. But this time she wouldn't be fighting alone. This time she carried the strength of Charlie Company with her. not just in tactics or technique, but in the renewed sense of purpose they had helped her rediscover. The eagle soared again, wings spread wide against the coming storm. Fort Liberty sprawled across the North Carolina landscape like a city unto itself, its training grounds bordered by dense pine forests that muffled the sounds of war games and weapons fire. Unlike the harsh, exposed terrain of Fort Hawkins, this place offered shadows within shadows, perfect for the kind of training Captain Mackenzie Reynolds had been tasked to implement. 3 weeks had passed since she'd left Texas. 3 weeks of preparation, of planning, of hunting. The search for Alexander Kovac had yielded little. The Serbian operative had gone to ground, leaving behind only the bodies of 2 more Nighthawk veterans, one in Montana, another in Virginia. Each killing methodical, professional, designed to look like an accident or random crime. Each victim bearing the eagle tattoo that marked them as targets. Mac's new command was housed in a remote section of Fort Liberty, designated simply as Training Area 17. No official name, no unit designation on any public record, just a collection of buildings, a specialized obstacle course, and 50 carefully selected soldiers pulled from various branches of service. They arrived knowing only that they had been chosen for advanced specialized training. Most came eagerly, ambitious for the career advancement such selection usually promised. None understood what they were really being prepared for. On their first day, Mac stood before them in a simple training uniform, no insignia except her captain's bars. The soldiers were arranged in formation, diverse in background, but uniform in their confusion and anticipation. "My name is Captain Reynolds," she began, voice carrying across the quiet parade ground. "You've been told you're here for advanced training." That's partially true. She paced slowly before them, studying faces, postures, eyes. "What you haven't been told is that this program has no name. It appears on no official record. If you succeed here, your achievements will never be acknowledged publicly. If you fail, your careers will continue elsewhere with no mark against you." Murmurs rippled through the ranks. This wasn't standard military protocol. You are here because someone, an instructor, a commander, a teammate, saw something in you. Not just skill, not just an intelligence. They saw adaptability, resilience, the capacity to operate beyond the boundaries of conventional warfare. She stopped pacing, faced them directly. "I'm not here to make you better soldiers. I'm here to make you something else entirely." Over the following days, Mac implemented a training regimen unlike anything the recruits had experienced. Dawn to dusk physical conditioning was just the foundation. Beyond that came specialized skills, lockpicking, surveillance detection, improvised weapons, identity concealment, techniques that belonged more to the realm of espionage than conventional military operations. Some questioned it. One lieutenant approached her after a particularly grueling session on escape methods. "Captain, with respect, this isn't standard special forces training." "No," she agreed, "it isn't." "Then what exactly are we preparing for?" She studied him for a moment. "For the missions no one else can handle. For the operations that can't fail but also can't exist." Understanding dawned in his eyes. "We're being trained for deniable ops." She neither confirmed nor denied, but her silence was answer enough. As training intensified, Mac divided the original 50 into smaller, tactical teams, each focused on different specializations: urban infiltration, rural survival, technical intelligence, close protection. The goal wasn't to create interchangeable operators, but a diverse, adaptable force where each member brought unique capabilities to the whole. Meanwhile, Mac's hunt for Kovac continued in the background. Each night after her trainees had collapsed into exhausted sleep, she pored over intelligence reports, surveillance footage, witness statements, anything that might lead her to the Serbian. General Montgomery provided what resources he could, but the trail remained frustratingly cold. Until the morning, a secure packet arrived from Fort Hawkins. Inside was a handwritten note from Sergeant Miller. "Found this in the old archives. Thompson thought you should see it. Be careful, Mom." Beneath it lay a yellowed folder containing a single photograph and a typed report from 1982. The photo showed a group of men in civilian clothes standing beside a nondescript building. No names were listed, but someone had circled one face with red ink, a young man with sharp features and cold eyes. The report detailed a joint training operation between American Special Forces and operatives from Yugoslavia, back when the country was still unified. Among the Yugoslav participants was a promising young intelligence officer named Alexander Kovac. Max stared at the image, pieces falling into place. Kovac hadn't just encountered Nighthawk during the Belgrade operation. He had history with his predecessors. This wasn't just about revenge for a failed operation. This was about something deeper, more personal. She immediately contacted Montgomery. General, I need everything we have on joint operations with Yugoslavia between 1980 and 1990, specifically anything involving training exchanges. That's ancient history, Captain. It's relevant history. I think Kovac was part of a shared training program. He knows our methods because we taught them to him. There was a long pause. I'll see what I can find. 2 days later, Montgomery arrived at Fort Liberty in person, carrying a classified file too sensitive to transmit electronically. They met in a secure room free of electronic devices with guards posted outside. You were right, the general said, spreading documents across the table. Operation Handshake, 1983. We exchanged training methods with select Warsaw Pact nations as part of a diplomatic initiative. Yugoslavia sent 12 men. Kovac was one of them. Who trained them from our side? Montgomery hesitated, then slid a personnel roster across the table. Max scanned the names, stopping at one near the bottom, Major William Hargrove. Hargrove knew Kovac, she said, the realization hitting her like a physical blow. Trained him personally, according to these reports. They spent 6 weeks together at a black site in Germany. Does Hargrove know about the connection? Montgomery shook his head. This file was buried deep, probably forgotten until you started asking questions. I need to talk to him. Already arranged, he'll be here tomorrow. When Hargrove arrived, he looked older than Mac remembered, the weight of resurrected memories etched into the lines of his face. They met in the same secure room, just the two of them. You should have told me, she said without preamble. I didn't remember him, Hargrove replied, his voice tired. It was 40 years ago, Reynolds, one training rotation among dozens. He remembered you. Hargrove nodded slowly. Apparently. What happened between you two? This feels personal. The colonel was silent for a long moment, staring at his hands. During the training, Kovac was exceptional, brilliant tactician, natural leader. But there was something wrong with him, a coldness. He enjoyed the killing scenarios too much. You reported him. I tried to have him removed from the program. His superiors refused, said he was too valuable. Hargrove looked up, his eyes haunted. 6 months later, I heard he'd been assigned to a Yugoslav Special Operations Unit. A year after that, rumors came back about atrocities, villages in Kosovo, dissidents who disappeared. And you felt responsible, Matt concluded. I helped create him, taught him techniques that made him more efficient at what he already was. The revelation changed the calculus. This wasn't just about Nighthawk. It was about Hargrove, about a shared history that had festered for decades. He's using you, Mac realized. The attacks on Nighthawk operators, they're a message to you. He's destroying what you helped build. Because I tried to destroy him, Hargrove agreed, and now he's back to finish what he started. They spent hours reviewing what they knew, trying to predict Kovac's next move. If his vendetta was truly against Hargrove and what he represented, then the attacks would continue, expanding to include anyone connected to the colonel's legacy. Fort Hawkins, Max said suddenly. Charlie Company. Hargrove's face paled. You think he'd target trainees? I think he'd target anything you value, anything that carries your influence forward. She stood, decision made. We need to warn them. But the warning came too late. That evening, as they were finalizing security protocols, Montgomery burst into the room, his face grim. There's been an incident at Fort Hawkins, an explosion at the barracks. Mac felt her heart stop. Casualties? 3 injured, no fatalities. The targeted building was empty. Charlie Company was on a night exercise. Miller, Mac said, is he? Sergeant Miller is fine. He's the one who ordered the night exercise, changed the schedule at the last minute. Relief washed over her, followed immediately by renewed resolve. He knew. Somehow he knew they were coming. There's more, Montgomery continued. Security cameras caught images of the suspects. One of them matches Kovac's description. It was confirmation of what they already suspected, but hearing it made it real. Kovac had escalated from hunting former operators to targeting the next generation. He's getting bolder, Hargrove observed, coming out of the shadows. Good, Mac replied. That makes him easier to catch. The attack on Fort Hawkins changed the dynamic. What had been a careful, methodical response became an urgent mobilization. Montgomery authorized a joint task force, combining Mac's trainees with resources from military intelligence and elements of Charlie Company relocated from Fort Hawkins. When Miller arrived with 20 of his best, the reunion was brief but powerful. He saluted Mac with a precision that spoke of continued discipline. "Captain," he said formally, "Charlie Company reporting as ordered." She returned the salute. "Sergeant, your timing is excellent." Later, away from the others, they spoke more candidly. "How did you know?" she asked. "About the attack?" Miller's expression was grim. "We've been implementing your security protocols, random schedule changes, rotating sleeping quarters, just like you taught us." "Good thinking. Not good enough. They still got onto the base, still planted explosives." His jaw tightened. "What the hell is going on, Captain? Who are these people?" She told him what she could, about Kovac, about the vendetta against Nighthawk and those connected to it. Not everything, but enough for him to understand the stakes. "So Charlie Company was targeted because of our association with you," he concluded. "With me, with Hargrove, with the training you received." She met his gaze directly. "I'm sorry, Miller. I brought this to your doorstep." "With respect, ma'am, we walked through that door willingly." His voice carried the conviction of a man who had found his purpose. "The question now is, how do we end this?" The answer came in the form of a strategy session that combined the experience of Hargrove, the tactical expertise of Mac, and the fresh perspectives of Miller and the new trainees. If Kovac wanted to destroy Nighthawk's legacy, they would use that obsession against him. "He's been hunting us," Mac explained to the assembled team. "Now we reverse the dynamic. We hunt him." The plan was audacious, but built on solid intelligence. They would create a false narrative, rumors of a reunion of former Special Operations personnel, including several known Nighthawk operators. The gathering would be held at an isolated training facility in the Appalachian Mountains, ostensibly for a private security contractor's annual retreat. "Kovac won't be able to resist," Hargrove predicted. "Too many targets in one place." "But we'll be ready," Mac added. "Every approach covered, every contingency planned for." "What if he doesn't come himself?" one of the new trainees asked. "What if he sends more mercenaries?" "Then we capture them, turn them, and use them to find him," Miller replied. The preparation was meticulous. The mountain facility, actually a long-abandoned FEMA training center, was wired with surveillance equipment, motion sensors, and carefully concealed defensive positions. Mac's trainees were assigned sectors based on their specialized skills. Charlie Company soldiers, paired with them, provided the benefit of their cohesive unit training. Hargrove, despite Montgomery's objections, insisted on being present. "I'm the one he wants," the colonel argued. "I need to be there." "As bait," Montgomery countered. "As necessary." The general relented, but with conditions. Hargrove would remain in the command center, surrounded by security, not exposed on the perimeter. 3 days before the operation, as final preparations were underway, Mac found herself alone on the facility's observation deck, staring out at the mist-shrouded mountains. The tattoo on her shoulder seemed to burn with anticipation. Footsteps approached behind her. "Thompson, thought I might find you here," the old sergeant said, joining her at the railing. "Nice view. Reminds me of a place we had in Laos, off the books, of course." She smiled faintly. "Of course." They stood in companionable silence for a moment. "You know," Thompson said finally, "I've seen a lot of operators come and go, a lot of programs rise and fall, Shadow Hunters, Black Echo, Nighthawk." He glanced at her. "What makes them last isn't the funding or the mission parameters or even the success rate. What then? Legacy. The knowledge that what you built will outlive you." He rolled up his sleeve, revealing his faded tattoo. "That's what this really means. Not what we did, but what we passed on." Mac considered this. "And if that legacy is threatened, then you protect it, not just for yourself, but for everyone who will come after." Thompson's weathered face creased in a smile. "Which is exactly what you're doing." The night before the operation, the facility hummed with controlled tension. Teams checked and rechecked equipment. Communications protocols were verified. Defensive positions secured. Everything was in place. In the command center, Mac conducted a final briefing with the team leaders. "Remember, Kovac is not just experienced. He's trained in our methods. He'll be looking for patterns, for weaknesses, for the approaches we'd typically secure." She pointed to the facility's schematic. "So we give him something unexpected. Defensive positions that seem obvious but are actually decoys. Communication channels that appear secure but are monitored. We let him think he's outsmarting us. While we're actually tracking his every move," Miller finished. "Exactly." As the leaders dispersed to their teams, Hargrove approached Mac. One final thing, he said, handing her a small box. Found this in the old Shadowhunter's archive before it was destroyed. Inside was a tarnished silver coin, similar to the Nighthawk token she carried, but older, its eagle design more stylized. Beneath it lay a folded slip of paper bearing a simple message. For the quiet warriors, may your shadows never fade. A Shadowhunter's token, Hargrove explained. Thompson thought you should have it. Tradition. She closed her hand around it, feeling the weight of history in her palm. Thank you. Dawn broke clear and cold over the mountains. The facility appeared quiet, minimally staffed, just as the cover story suggested. Vehicles began arriving mid-morning, carrying men and women who appeared to be private security contractors attending their retreat. In reality, they were Max operators and Miller's soldiers, playing their roles perfectly. By noon, the trap was fully set. Surveillance teams monitored every approach, every communication frequency, every digital system. In the command center, Mac, Hargrove, and Montgomery watched the integrated feeds with focused attention. Movement at the South Ridge, reported a spotter. Single individual moving tactically. Maintain observation, no engagement, Mac ordered. Let's see where he's going. More reports filtered in. 2 men approaching from the east, another team from the north. Coordinated professional, using the terrain for cover. Classic infiltration tactics. They're probing our perimeter, Miller observed, looking for holes. Let them find some, Mac replied, the ones we've prepared. The dance continued through the afternoon, the infiltrators advancing cautiously, Mac's teams tracking but not engaging, allowing them to penetrate the outer security layers. It was a calculated risk, but one based on sound strategy. The deeper they came, the more committed they would be, and the harder it would be for them to escape. At dusk, the first direct contact came. A sentry team discovered one of the infiltrators, leading to a brief exchange of fire, non-lethal rounds only, as per Mac's orders. The infiltrator retreated, apparently believing he had encountered a routine patrol rather than a prepared position. They're getting bolder, Montgomery noted. Nightfall will accelerate their timeline. Good, Mac replied. The sooner they commit, the sooner this ends. But as darkness settled over the mountains, something changed. The pattern of infiltration shifted. The careful probing gave way to more aggressive movement. They're converging on the main building, reported a spotter. Multiple teams, coordinated approach. Too coordinated, Mac realized suddenly. Too confident. She turned to the communications officer. Check all frequencies, now. The officer's fingers flew across his keyboard. His expression darkened. We're being jammed. Local frequencies only. They're inside our communications, Hargrove said. They know our positions. Mac's mind raced. Change the plan. All teams, fall back to secondary positions. Authentication protocol echo. The authentication would confirm the order came from her, not from someone who had hijacked their communications. But the damage was done. The infiltrators had gained an advantage. How did they get our frequencies? Montgomery demanded. They didn't, Mac replied, the truth dawning on her. They were given them. Hargrove's face paled. We have a leak. The realization changed everything. If Kovac had inside information, the carefully laid trap could become a killing ground for the wrong side. Lock down the command center, Mac ordered. No one in or out without direct authorization from me. As security personnel moved to secure the doors, she turned to Miller. Get to your team. Make sure they understand. Trust no communications unless authenticated. He nodded and departed, moving with purpose. What about Kovac? Montgomery asked. If he has inside information, he might not come himself. Oh, he'll come, Hargrove said grimly. This is personal for him. He'll want to see it happen. Max studied the surveillance feeds, looking for patterns, for the telltale signs of a master tactician. There, she said suddenly, pointing to a ridgeline northwest of the facility. That position commands the best view of the entire compound. If I were coordinating this assault, that's where I'd be. It's outside our security perimeter, Montgomery noted. Exactly. He's staying clear of the trap while springing his own. Mac made a decision. I'm going after him. Alone? Hargrove objected. That's exactly what he wants. No, she countered. What he wants is to destroy everything we've built, to erase the legacy. She checked her weapon. I'm not going to let that happen. Before they could argue further, she was gone, slipping out through a maintenance tunnel that led away from the main building. The night air was crisp, carrying the scent of pine and the distant musk of wood smoke. Mac moved with practiced silence, using the terrain for cover, avoiding the likely observation points. The ridge was a kilometer away, a difficult approach in darkness over rough ground, but she had trained for worse, in conditions far more hostile than these North Carolina mountains. Her body remembered what to do, how to move, how to become part of the landscape rather than an intruder upon it. As she neared the position, she detected the faint electronic signature of communications equipment, a directional antenna, sophisticated enough to penetrate their jamming. She circled wide, approaching from the blind side, using the ridge itself to mask her movement. And there he was, Alexander Kovac. Older than his photograph, his once dark hair now steel gray, but still lean, still dangerous. He stood beside a compact communications array, speaking quietly into a headset, directing his forces with the precision of a conductor leading an orchestra. Max studied him for a long moment, measuring distances, angles, options. Then she stepped into the clearing, her weapon raised. "Hello, Kovac." He turned, remarkably composed for a man suddenly facing an armed opponent. His eyes, cold, calculating, assessed her with professional detachment. "Stormbird," he said, his accent still thick despite decades in the West. "I wondered if you would come." "You've been busy," she replied, "hunting my people." "Your people?" He smiled thinly. "You mean Hargrove's little experiments? His disposable soldiers?" "They weren't disposable to us." "No?" Kovac seemed genuinely curious. "Then why send them to latent places like Belgrade, in operations that never existed?" "You know why. Because some missions cannot bear scrutiny." He gestured toward the facility below, where flashes of light indicated the operation was still unfolding. "Just like tonight, how many will die here for Hargrove's pride, for his legacy?" "None if you call off your men." Kovac laughed, a sound without humor. "You still don't understand. This was never about killing operators. It was about exposing the truth, about bringing the shadows into the light. By murdering veterans, by targeting trainees, by forcing accountability," he countered. "Your government disavows these operations, pretends they never happen. The men who order them sleep soundly in their beds, while those who execute them carry the weight alone." There was something in his voice, not just anger, but pain. The pain of someone who had seen too much, done too much, all in the name of duty. "What happened to you?" Mac asked, genuinely curious despite the tension of the moment. Kovac's expression hardened. "I was like you once, believing in the mission, in the necessity of the shadows, until I saw what it really was. Powerful men using loyal soldiers as tools, as weapons, to be discarded when no longer useful." "And your answer is to hunt those soldiers, the ones who served just like you did?" "My answer is to expose the system that created them, that created us." He gestured to the communications array. "Tonight, everything changes. I have journalists ready to receive files, operations, locations, names, the entire history of America's shadow wars, laid bare." Mac felt a chill that had nothing to do with the mountain air. "You'll put thousands of lives at risk. Some truths demand sacrifice. Not this kind." She tightened her grip on her weapon. "I can't let you do this. You can't stop it," he replied calmly. "The transmission is automated. If I don't enter a code every 30 minutes, everything sends automatically. Kill me and you only accelerate the process." It was a clever failsafe, and Mac knew he was telling the truth. She could see it in his eyes, the satisfaction of a man who had planned for every contingency. "But not quite everyone. I'm not going to kill you, Kovac." She lowered her weapon slightly. "I'm going to show you something." Slowly, deliberately, she rolled up her sleeve, revealing her tattoo, the eagle of Nighthawk, stark against her skin. "You know what this means, what it costs to earn it." "A mark of ownership," he said dismissively. "Hargrove's brand on his attack dogs." "No." She took a step closer. "A symbol of choice. We chose the shadows. We chose to carry burdens others couldn't. Not because we were ordered to, but because someone had to. Noble sentiments for assassination squads." "Is that what you think we were? Kill teams?" She shook her head. "We extracted dissidents from North Korea. We secured nuclear material in the Caucasus. We prevented genocide in Africa. Yes, sometimes we killed, but more often, we saved." Kovac's expression wavered just slightly. Convenient justifications. Truth. She reached into her pocket and withdrew the 2 coins, her Nighthawk token and the older Shadow Hunter's medallion. "Do you know what these really represent? Not programs, not operations. Legacy. The understanding that what we do matters, even if no one ever knows we did it." She held them out. Your name is in the Shadow Hunters archives, Kovac. You were one of us once, before something changed you. His eyes fixed on the coins, recognition flickering across his features. Where did you get that? From the men you'd been hunting, the ones who carried the same burden you did. She took another step closer. Whatever happened to you, whatever turned you against your own, it doesn't have to end this way. For a moment, just a moment, something like doubt crossed his face. Then his expression hardened again. It's too late, he said. The system is corrupt. It needs to be exposed, whatever the cost. And the cost will be paid by the operators in the field, the ones like us, not by the politicians, not by the generals, just the soldiers. Kovac hesitated, conflict visible in his eyes. Some prices must be paid. I agree, Max said quietly, but not by the wrong people. A sound from behind, twig snapping. Kovac reacted instantly, reaching for a weapon concealed at his back. Mac moved faster, tackling him just as a shot rang out. They tumbled to the ground, Mac twisting to absorb the impact. More shots, a brief exchange of fire in the darkness. Then silence. Mac rolled to her feet, weapon ready, scanning for threats. A figure emerged from the trees. Miller, his rifle at low ready. Captain, he called. You all right? Fine, she replied, turning back to Kovac. The Serbian lay on his side, blood spreading across his jacket. The bullet had caught him in the shoulder. Serious, but not immediately life-threatening. Who fired first? She demanded. Not us, Miller assured her. One of his men. We tracked him up here after you left. Kovac coughed, grimacing in pain. It doesn't matter. The countdown continues, 15 minutes until the files transmit. Mac knelt beside him. Tell me how to stop it. Why should I? Because deep down, you know this isn't about justice. It's about pain. Your pain. She held his gaze. I understand that. Better than you think. But this will only create more victims. Kovac's breathing was becoming labored. Shock setting in. His eyes, once cold with purpose, now held uncertainty. The men you've killed, Mac continued, they were like you, carrying the same weight, fighting the same battles within themselves. They served a corrupt system, he insisted, but the conviction was fading from his voice. They served their country, just like you served yours, before you lost faith. Something broke in his expression then, a crack in the armor of certainty he had built around himself. The code, he said, finally, 61983, the year we trained together, Hargrove and I. Mac nodded to Miller, who moved quickly to the communications array. Moments later, he called back, it's done, transmission canceled. Kovac closed his eyes, decades of tension seeming to drain from his body. He was right about you, he said softly. Who was? Hargrove. When he trained us, he said the best operators weren't the ones who followed orders blindly. They were the ones who understood why the orders mattered. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. I forgot that part. As medical personnel arrived to treat Kovac's wound, Max stood surveying the ridgeline, the facility below, the mountains beyond. The operation was winding down, Kovac's men surrendering once they realized their leader had been captured. Miller approached, his expression somber. We found the leak, junior communications officer, been feeding Kovac information for weeks. Why? Money, he claims, but I think there's more to it. Mac nodded. There was always more to it. The shadows bred their own kind of darkness, their own temptations and compromises. What happens now, Miller asked. To all of this? He gestured vaguely, encompassing the facility, the operation, the programs they represented. That's not for us to decide, she replied. We do the work. Others determine its place in history. Seems unfair. It's the nature of shadows, Miller. They exist because of light, but they're defined by what they conceal. He considered this. And you're okay with that? With no recognition, no acknowledgement? She touched the place where her tattoo lay beneath her uniform. The recognition that matters is here. The acknowledgement comes from those who understand what it costs. As dawn broke over the mountains, casting long shadows across the facility, Max stood with Hargrove, Montgomery, and Thompson on the observation deck. Below, teams were securing equipment, processing prisoners, dismantling the operation with the same efficiency with which they had constructed it. Kovac will recover, Montgomery reported. He'll face charges, of course, but given the classified nature of his actions, it'll be handled quietly. And his files, Hargrove asked? Contained, his network identified and dismantled. So it's over, Thompson said, though his tone suggested a question rather than a statement. This chapter is, Mac replied, but the story continues. She looked out at the training areas where her operators and Charlie Company soldiers were already gathering, comparing notes, forming the bonds that would define their future operations. These weren't just trainees anymore. They were the next generation of shadow warriors, carrying forward a legacy they might never fully understand, but would honor with their service. "What about you, Captain?" Montgomery asked. "Ready for your next assignment?" She considered the question. Fort Liberty had been meant as a temporary posting, a staging ground for the hunt for Kovac. That mission was complete, but something else had taken root here, something worth nurturing. "I'd like to stay," she said. "Continue what we've started." Montgomery nodded, unsurprised. "I thought you might. The paperwork's already drawn up. Training Area 17 is yours officially. No name, no designation, just a blank space on the map where we build the future." "Fitting," Hargrove commented. "The best work happens in the spaces between." As the others departed, Mac remained on the deck, watching the mountains gradually emerge from the morning mist. She thought of Charlie Company, of the trainees who would follow them, of the missions that would never make headlines but would shape the world nonetheless. She thought of her father, who had almost walked this path before fate intervened, of Thompson carrying the legacy of Shadowhunters, of Hargrove, whose difficult choices had created the foundation upon which she now built. The tattoo on her shoulder no longer burned. Instead, it felt like a touchstone, a connection to something larger than herself, a lineage of quiet warriors who had chosen the harder path, the unseen road, the thankless task. From her pocket, she withdrew the 2 coins, Nighthawk and Shadowhunters. Different symbols, different eras, same purpose. She held them for a moment, feeling their weight, their history. Then she returned them to her pocket, close to her heart, where they belonged. Below, Miller was organizing the soldiers for the day's debriefing. He caught her eye, saluted. She returned it, a simple gesture that carried the weight of shared understanding. This was her legacy now, not just what she had done in the shadows, but what she would build there. Not just the operations she had led, but the leaders she would create. As the sun climbed higher, casting the world in stark relief, light and shadow, known and unknown, Mac Reynolds understood her place in the pattern. She was a bridge between past and future, between what had been and what would be. The eagle soared on, its wings spanning generations, its eyes fixed on horizons yet to come. 6 months later, a small ceremony took place in a secluded courtyard at Fort Liberty. No press, no public announcement, just a gathering of those who needed to be there. Hargrove, Thompson, Miller, Montgomery, and 20 soldiers who had proven themselves worthy of a special designation. Mac stood before them, her captain's bars now replaced by the gold oak leaf of a major. In her hands, she held a box containing 20 silver coins, newly minted but bearing an ancient symbol, an eagle in flight, 3 arrows in its talons, surrounded by 13 stars. "Today, you join a lineage that has no name in the official records," she told them, "a tradition of service that exists in the spaces between what is acknowledged and what is necessary." One by one, they approached, each receiving a coin and a handshake. No speeches, no certificates, just the silent exchange of symbol and commitment. When the last coin was distributed, Mac addressed them once more. "The eagle you now carry represents not just what you've accomplished, but what you've chosen to become. Remember that choice on the difficult days ahead." They stood at attention, these men and women who had proven themselves not just skilled, but worthy of the shadows. Different faces, different backgrounds, united by a common purpose and the understanding that some battles must be fought beyond the light of recognition. "Dismissed," she said finally. As they dispersed, Hargrove approached her. "They're ready," he said. "You've done good work here." "We've done good work," she corrected. "All of us." He nodded, acknowledging the truth of it. "Your father would be proud." "I think he is," she replied, "wherever he is." Later, as twilight settled over the training grounds, Mac walked alone to the edge of the property where a simple memorial had been erected. Not an official monument, just a stone marker bearing the eagle symbol and the words, "For those who served in silence, your shadows will never fade." She placed her hand on the cool stone, feeling the connection to all who had come before, the named and unnamed, the acknowledged and the forgotten, the visible and the hidden. This was the true legacy of the eagle, not glory, not recognition, but the quiet understanding that some battles must be fought from the shadows, by those willing to stand guard where the light cannot reach. As darkness fell, Major Mackenzie Reynolds turned back toward the base, toward the future she was building in the spaces between light and shadow. The eagle on her shoulder no longer felt like a burden or a brand. It was a reminder of the choice she had made and continued to make each day, to serve where service was hardest, to fight where fighting was necessary, to lead where leadership demanded the greatest sacrifice. In the distance, her trainees were gathering for night operations, their movements precise, their purpose clear. Thompson stood with them, sharing stories that connected them to the past. Miller directed their preparation with the confidence of a man who had found his calling. And somewhere beyond the perimeter, Montgomery and Hargrove were ensuring that their work would continue, protected from the politics and publicity that might compromise its effectiveness. This was her world now, not a hidden one, but a chosen one, not a place of darkness, but a place of necessary shadow. The eagle soared on, silent against the night sky, its wings spread wide, its gaze fixed on horizons unseen by ordinary eyes. And beneath it, the guardians of those shadows continued their eternal watch, their names unspoken, their deeds unheralded, their purpose unwavering. This was the way of the eagle. This was the legacy of shadows.